Okay, so I've got 3ds Max open with a blank, new file. Just remember, if you ever want to go and make a new file, use reset on the file menu, not new. So file reset will give you what I've got there. And then under customize, if you go to unit setup, you can check that the display units are millimeters. And I'll just remind you, leave the system units alone. Leave that on 1 unit equals 1 inches. And that's it. So, and just again, so you know though, you can change the display units anytime. If you realise later that it's easy for you to type in meters, you can come here and change it, and then work in meters, and it's fine. Okay, so what I want to make though is this, or something similar, and give you an idea how to model. It's actually quite simple geometry, but then it's very easy to deform into these forms that you have in this memorial in Dubai, using Max, of course, with primitives, and I'll show you a couple of options for that. So over in the Create panel, you've got the primitives tool, and just remind you about the general navigation. It starts with the Create panel, and then the first button is Geometry, and then the second button is Shapes, which is more 2D type shapes, I suppose, and line type objects, and then it goes to other things you can create, like lights and cameras and so on. So you want to start to get familiar with the way that's organised, but then remember also, going back to the first one, geometry, you then have the drop down where you have all the different categories of geometry. So just remember, that's the hierarchy, starting with the tabs, then the buttons, I suppose, or the panels, maybe you could call them, and then the drop down lists within each one. Now, don't think you're going to have to remember hundreds of things, because when you go to the other objects, things like lights, you don't have anywhere near as many options. So it's mostly this first one, geometry, that has a lot of different categories of geometry, and then shapes, you've got a few as well. But as you go further, you'll see you don't have as much to remember. But again, just want to start to get you more and more familiar with that hierarchy. And but again, here we're starting on the first one, so leaving on the standard primitives, and then you've got the box tool. So with a box, and boxes are often going to be a starting point for lots of different models, even things that will end up being nothing like boxes. But in this case, of course, those shapes already do look like boxes, so that's great. So I've clicked on box, and I'll click and drag to set the size for the base, and then release the cursor to set the bottom corner of that rectangle at the bottom. So it's click to set the first point, release to set the second point, or the other corner of your rectangle, and then move the cursor up and click again to set a height. And the process with Max is quite standard in that way. When you're making objects like this, you generally will click and drag, and then release, and then click again, and sometimes you have to click again multiple times for different objects. So just experiment with that process, but usually it's quite similar. And notice that I didn't worry too much about the size. So often you just want to make the object, get it in there, then come back and fine-tune it and adjust it as you need to. So to interactively change the size, there's a few options. You can use the spinners. So by clicking and dragging on the up and down arrows, and you'll see whenever you have an up and down arrow, down here, we've got it, sorry, if I go to move, you'll see we get these up and down arrows even down here on the status bar. So wherever you have an up and down arrow, you can click and drag to adjust that value. So you click and drag on the spinner, it's called. And now though, you can see I've lost the spinners, or the fields, for the box. So do you remember what to do?
Modify.
Exactly, you go to modify, yeah, that's good. So yeah, so at first, I'll just make another box. So at first, you get the properties in the Create panel, so you can change the length, width and height as you create your objects. But then once you go to do something else, and it might just be choosing a selection option, you'll lose the properties on the Create panel, but they're of course not gone, they're just on the Modify tab. And that's normally where you'll spend the time editing your objects. And so that's, again, all done in the Command panel using those spinners. if you want to change them interactively as primitives, which means they're still boxes. So you probably want to get the size roughly right, so maybe just have a look at this again. And because I've seen people in front of this, I've got an idea that these maybe would be at least a couple of metres across at the base, and then maybe each of these panels is maybe a little bit more than a metre high, so let's say 1.5 metres, so that's 3 and then 6. So that's 6 metres by 2-ish. Great thing with Max, we can adjust it. Okay, so here again, it's like model making in real life. You definitely want to have an idea of the size. But I don't know about you, but when I'm making models, I don't measure everything. Often I'll just make things to fit in the size I've got. I'll definitely always have my scale rule there and have a good idea of the size, but I'm not going to go and model things to the nearest 10 mil in real world units. And so it's the same in Max. As long as it's close enough, that's good enough. So here I've got the height. I'm just going to drag it up to about 6 metres. You can of course type 6,000 if you're really worried about making it precise. But again, like I said, close enough is generally good enough. And so then the thickness, again I'll just make it look the way I want it to, and bringing it out, so you can see there that's got about the proportions of what we're just looking at. Good chance to quickly look at some of the display tools as well, because so far I've just been using the wheel to zoom in and out, and then you hold down Alt, just remember to hold down the wheel and orbit. Hold down the wheel without Alt to pan, of course, but then notice as I zoom, it's zooming in increments, and I want to have it zoom with a bit more control. So there's a really good shortcut for that. It's Control and Alt, and then you drag with the wheel, and that zooms a lot more smoothly. And that's common. A lot of Autodesk programs have that shortcut. Okay, so that's a really useful thing when you want to zoom, with a bit more control. And so there we are. Then I'll move this box over and just show you two different approaches that you could use to make the thing we're trying to make. I'll just make this one slightly different size, just for something different. And I'm going to do something similar to both. So in other words, I'm going to make them both sloping and deformed in different ways. So the first one, I'm going to right click and then convert to Editable Poly. And that's really the one I'm trying to emphasise. That's probably the most important approach to modelling in the program, is working with those polygonal tools, or editable polys. But once you've done that, it's no longer a box. So you can't just type in a size, the length, width and height. Now, you can always make it that size by comparing it to references, or you can measure and make it the right size. But again, it's again like physical modelling. You don't always need to measure things accurately. You can do it by eye, and that's what I'll do here. So I'll go to, and actually, sorry, before I do that, I just want to show you the difference. I'll undo and show you that the modifier you used, Edit Poly, in the tutorial, hopefully you'll remember that, it does give you the same options, and the other advantage is that it's got the box still there. So you can then go back and work with the length, width and height. The problem is though, if you think about the way it would work then if I start deforming it, and doing something like this even, which isn't that tricky, it will probably spaz out in a minute. So here, there we are. So now when I go back to the box, it's saying here basically that it can't code. It'll let you do it, but it gives you a chance here to do what's called holding. So holding is like a temporary save, because they know there's a good chance it might even make the program crash. So it's such an overwhelming thing for the program because it doesn't know what to do. If I go back and change the length or the width or the height, how does that work with the changes I've just made to the geometry after that? And so that's what this message is all about. So I'm going to say, no, I don't want to change it. So instead of worrying about keeping the box, usually you'll find, and most people who do this professionally don't use modifiers like that unless they really need to. And so the preferred approach is to just convert it instead to an editable point. And again, the tools are very similar, but technically it is a different procedure, and you have slightly different options for modelling as well. So here now, if I go to Polygon, very easy to select one of the faces, and to make it slope like you can see in the example there, really easy. Move it using one of the arrows to change the direction using one axis. So there I've used the x-axis, I can use the y-axis to make it go that way, and z of course to change the height. I'm just going to bring back my other viewport so you can see it there as well. So when you're working with these things, it's often good to see all four views. And so then with the edge option, you can do the next thing, which you can see there, is to bring one of these edges down. So I'll just choose one of those edges, bring it down, of course, using Z. And here, maybe it's good to have a perspective view so we can start to see how it looks at a similar angle to our photo. And again there, Control and Alt works really well. Control and Alt with the wheel to zoom. Okay, so then maybe I can see, well, it's actually not maybe high enough. So I'll go back to, well, I'll show you a few good selection options. I want to select the face here. I can't really see it except in the top view, so I could always select it there if I go to Polygon. But it's a good chance to just look at the selection tools. You have the Move tool, which works as a selection tool, so that's what I've got selected. And then next to that, if you've been wondering about windows and crossings in 3ds Max, having hopefully used them in Revit and AutoCAD, it doesn't work like those programs where left to right and right to left give you a window or a crossing. Instead, there's a toggle for it. So at the moment, it's always a crossing. So if I make a window, it's going to select everything it touches. But if I change that to window and then make a window around the top, it'll only get that face at the top. So that's an easy way of getting that single face. And again, I'll just make it a bit taller. And then I'm going to right-click in the top viewport to make it active without deselecting, and then I can make it slope a bit more. So that's one way. I'll maybe come back and do some more with that in a minute, but that's one fairly easy way of deforming a box. And you can take it a lot further than that, but that's a simple example. But I'm going to show you another way. So I showed you that Edit Poly modifier, but another one that you used in the tutorial was FFD. It's one of my favourite modifiers. So FFD means free-form deformation. And it's a great one to use for deformed designs. So with that, I've got the box on the right selected, so I'm going to choose FFD. I'll keep it simple and just 2 by 2 by 2. So to work with that, you need to expand the modifier. So up here there's an arrow there to expand it, and then you'll see the control points. And so there, I'm going to make a window to select the 2 control points on the top right corner, and then I can deform the box, and it works for this a lot better than that Edit Poly modifier would. So it won't get confused. If I go back and decide I want to change the size of that box, not a problem. Exactly. Exactly, yeah. So it's still a box underneath. Yeah, that's right. So FFD is a great one if you want to keep the original geometry and just deform it in different ways. And because it's such a great modifier, I might just show you with another primitive. So I'll make another box. It's a really good thing for creativity, this one. And so I'm going to go to the boxes properties and add in a few more segments. So here I'm going to mostly add height segments, but I'll also put in some, not width, so it's going to be length segments. So if I turn on the edges in the viewport, you'll see it's divided up my box to have additional surfaces, and that'll be obvious. You'll see in a minute why I've done that. So I'll put on the 3x3x3 FFD, which is going to give me extra control points. I'll go down and then choose some of the control points maybe in the middle, and then we can deform this and we'll get more of an organic sort of shape because we'll get the curve as it deforms. So you can get really interesting things, but underneath it all, it's still a box. So that's a really powerful modelling tool, but fairly simple one to use as well. So FFDs are great, and there is an option to have as many control points as you want. So you've got the 2x2x2, 3x3x3, 4x4x4, and then you've got the box and the cylinder options, which essentially that you choose how many control points you want. And I don't think there's a limit. So you can do super powerful things with that. And we saw someone a couple of years ago did an amazing design where it was this walkway going off into the sea, and then she had these curving things over the top that was all done with that, just bending boxes. Anyhow, I don't want to do organic things this time, so I'm going to delete that one and come back to my boring old boxes, and then we can do some instances of those. So if I start with this one, not instances, sorry, just copies. So I'm going to just hold down Shift and then click and drag and change the option to copy, and then I can put in a couple of copies, and then go and edit the polygons to get some variations and get something similar to that Dubai memorial that I've got. So that one will maybe come up, and you take more time with it than I am, of course, but just so you get the idea of the techniques. And then, okay, so then the final thing is to get the materials in a controlled way on these surfaces. And this is, again, where it does, in 3ds Max, give you a lot more control over the way textures go onto a surface. And it's not because Revit's a bad program, it's just Revit does so many things and does a huge number of things that 3ds Max would never do. And so rendering and detailed material assignment is really just an extra thing in Revit. It's not a core part of the program. But 3D programs have always got this as a core feature, the ability to apply textures as precisely as you need to a surface like this. And so that's what I'll show you. So we've got the object there, which I'll just maximize the viewport, and then I'll isolate. Right-click and you can isolate selection, or you can Alt-Q is the shortcut. Okay, so I've got my object on its own, and then I'll bring up which material editor you prefer, compact or slate? Compact, yeah. Compact's probably the best one to start with. If you've got dual screen, slate is brilliant, but without dual screen, slate's a bit painful, takes up too much room, I think. So, okay, so I've got my default materials there, but I want to get a new one. So I'm going to go to the Get Material option down on the left there, and that brings up the asset browser, or what do they call it in Max, the material map browser. And so there you'll see you have a lot of the same options as you have in Revit. So remember, in the Appearance folder in Revit, you have the material library, or the Appearance library, that's called in Revit, but it's the same as this. So that's a great thing. You've got that common material library between the two programs. So if I go to Metal here, and then Fabricated, we should have something that's similar to what I need. Or, let's see, there should be some in steel, sorry. They should have some plate ones. Yeah, okay, so you've got these plate type materials as well, which will be close to what I I'll show you that. So I'm going to just start with this one, and then I'll choose another slot, and then I'll bring in the other one just so we can look at the difference. So that was in fabricated, and any of these really, they're all metal, I think. Oh, that's a generic. Okay, they're both generics. Okay, that's good. Okay, so the first one is a metal material. The second one is a generic material. So the metal one, well, I'll just drag it and release to place it, and it uses a map there, which you can see whenever you see a file name. That generally means it's using that that texture. And so the easiest way to know how it's working is to show it in the viewport. So this option here shows the map in the viewport. The problem is that the object is, how can I say it? It's combining, or the material, sorry, is combining all these different textures. So I just want to see one of them. So I'm going to click on this one here. That's the texture slot, and then choose that button. Okay, so it's just that little thing. Again, it's you can see it is making a change. And again, if I go back up, doing it at that level, it's also going to make a change, but it's going to be harder to see. Now, it's hard to see what I'm talking about until we've also got the map scale right. So to do that, we've got to check the mapping on this geometry. And I should have shown you this before. But what I might do is I'll put on a new modifier, because you should know how to do that as well. Yeah, I won't show you with the inbuilt tool. So, okay, so did you come across Uvw Maps in the tutorials at all? You might not have gotten to that one. Yeah, it's in one of the later ones. So when you're working with textures or material coordinates, the coordinates are labelled U, V and W instead of X, Y and Z. So don't be worried about it, it just means X, Y, Z for materials. So I'm going to choose Uvw Map, and then box, and there you've got the real world map size option, and I've disabled that so that you can now see the texture. Right, so the reason we couldn't see it before is because that option was on, which made the texture very small, and we'd have to zoom in to see it. I just wanted to show you that, but without that option, then you can see the texture more clearly, and then it'll be a bit more obvious what this button does. So if I go back up a level, just want to make it clear, see there, with this on, if you've got an amazing graphics card, you can have the whole material showing in real time with all of these different channels. And this is the thing that makes people a bit, or puts people off Macs at first, because you have these abilities to show really amazing things in the viewport. It sometimes can be, can be overwhelming when you don't realise that that will often create issues with the way it looks on most computers if you haven't got a really powerful graphics card and all the light options to have it set for realistic or at least high quality, and a lot of other things you've got to use to make it work. So what I'm saying is, instead of using that show material in viewport option at the material level, go to the map that you're trying to look at and investigate, and so in this case it's this slot here, and then turn it on. And then you'll only see one channel at a time. Okay, so the Uvw map, really I just put on to show you that. I'm going to disable it. I'm not going to take it off. So if you ever want to disable something in your stack, just turn off the eye there. And that way, you can see it's still mapping the texture on. And that's because I remember I started with a box. So I might just show you if I make a box. Notice it's got its own mapping coordinates and they're set to real world map size. Right, so you do need to have a bit of understanding about that, even though it's done automatically for you. Again, because Max gives you the ability to completely control the way textures appear, you do need to be aware that mapping coordinates are needed to control the textures in that way. Even though it is done for you automatically, you definitely need to know that it's a separate thing that is set to these objects. Again, I'm going to use the inbuilt mapping, but you do also have the option of applying a modifier, like I've just done, to apply the mapping, and so you've got to have some idea about that. Uvw Map, again, is the one I've used. There's another one that's even more powerful called Unwrap Uvw. Have any of you come across unwrapping textures? So if you know anyone who does 3D for a living, I'm not going to show you Unwrap, but I definitely want to show you some other examples of mapping, because it, I think, makes it much easier to understand when you've seen it. Okay, so once you see an unwrapped map, it does generally become pretty clear how they work. So, well, let's look at this one. So that's an unwrapped map of a person, of the skin, and the clothes. So that's how they do textures for games and movies and anything, high end, where you've got to control it at that level. They don't make a material for every little part that's a different colour. Right? And then apply it to each face. They have a texture that goes over the whole piece of geometry, and then wraps around it with that modifier, and then you can actually get, what you do is, to make this, you export the unwrapped version of the mesh, and then you go into Photoshop and you literally can paint that texture, and then because it's got those texture coordinates, it knows how to wrap it around a complex piece of geometry. So it's a really powerful technique and used a lot in 3D. So there's a great example. There's one that's been applied. Right, so it's used throughout all 3D programs. Maya, they do it even more. But Max has really good tools for unwrapping and then wrapping textures. But we'll get to that later. But anyway, I just want to give you a better idea that texture coordinates are always there, and they definitely need to be used when you're looking at materials like this that have textures you want to control precisely. And so that's the material that I started with, and then here it's got the image that it uses. So that's this diamond plate image. Now, it's not an unwrapped texture, it's just a flat one. So it's called Texture Diamond Plate 3 Rough. And I'll just find it. Yeah, that'll be it. Okay, so it's just a JPEG file. So I can just substitute that then for another image file. There's a good chance I'll have one in here that's pretty close to what we need. But you all know about the other place where I've saved textures that you can use for materials on the P drive? Yep, you all know that, yep. Okay, so I'll just go there. So we've got the, so annoying, go browse here. It's not annoying actually, the history in Max actually works, unlike most programs. This thing is useful. Have you seen how bad that is for most programs when they bring up that history thing and it doesn't give you anything useful? Maybe it's just me. Anyhow, so at least the one in Max does get used a bit because it works. But again, here I want to use look in, and then I'm going to browse to that material images folder on the P drive, where again I've just stored lots of images for use in materials. And here this metal folder has a few other things that we don't have in that one. Really sure. Maybe bit rougher than I was hoping. Where's in this one? That one's kind of interesting too. Anyway, so, oh no, this one, perfect. Okay, so I'll use that. But I want to edit it first. So I'm going to go and open it with Photoshop. So that's the other key thing. When you're controlling materials at this level, sorry, my program's just frozen. So, yes, of course, when you're controlling things at this level, you need to then be able to control the textures at a really fine-grained level. So make sure you're thinking about editing things in Photoshop when it's not exactly what you need. Don't try and change it all in the material settings. Often the easiest approach is just to go and edit the texture that you're using as part of your material. So here maybe something I want to do is put on a bit of an edge around this. So I'll just go and select the rectangle, and then I'm going to hold down, so it's Alt to deselect the inner part. So basically I've just got a bit of a border around my image. That'll do. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate my layer, and I'll put on a, I'll fill that first. I'll just fill it with black. And then put on a multiply blend or channel, and then change the opacity to get a bit of a scene. Okay, so basically with multiply, where it's black, it reduces the amount that it comes, the base image comes through, and where it's white, it lets it through completely. So instead of just filling it with black, it's letting through the image behind a certain amount. Oh, yeah, they do similar things, but multiply just it's not really technically putting a black overlay on top. It's it's affecting the amount that the original comes through. Yeah. So, but yeah, opacity is kind of similar as well, and you can obviously use them together. I'm just trying to zoom there. It's not working, so I'll use the shortcut. Okay, so I'll just save it like that. Okay, so I'll save as, and just save a PNG copy. So I'll still plate sheet. Okay, so now back in the Max, and I've got that file there saved in the folder I was just working in. I'll choose that, and then again zooming in, it's there, but it's very small. So you've got there the scale. So let's just make it the size it is in real life, and I'll show you some tricks for that in a minute. But for now, we'll make it what is it? Probably about 500 across, and then the height was about 1500, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, now that should be changing. What have I done there first? What's going on? That's the issue with this new thing. That should definitely have changed it. But it's not. Okay, so I'll put the modifier back on. It's frustrating when this happens. This is all to do with the change. Autodesk made a huge mistake basically, and they changed their materials over to these Autodesk materials, which were meant to make it easier and more user-friendly. The problem is that this, if you don't change it here, I'll put the modifier back on so you can see. So that's with real world scale. Yep, so that should be, again, it's applying it a bit differently, but that should be the right size, and it just doesn't seem to be changing. So I'll show you another option for materials that will make it work, but I'm just going to see if I change it here. Yeah, it's crazy. I never should have made this change, but basically this, you can see there, isn't doing anything. Because, yeah, there's another material channel they want you to use, which no one does. So, yeah, it is incredibly frustrating. If we go and have a look at this one, yeah. I'll change it anyway, but I'm fairly certain it's not going to change. Right, and so, and look, honestly, I don't think anyone who uses the program professionally uses these Autodesk materials. And it's a shame because that's what you get from Revit. Now, I can make it, if you really need to use them, I can make it change, but I'd have to use some channels I don't want to show you now. So what I'll show you instead is that we can use this one. So I've just switched over there to the, this is called a physical material. And it will do everything that the Autodesk one does, but notice here we've got a lot of things hidden. With the physical material, it's got all of the things exposed. I know it can seem like a lot to take in, but once you've tried it a few times, it'll hopefully make a bit more sense. And so there, I'm just going to choose the, from the list of presets, one of the metals. Maybe, sorry, where's the steel one? There's the steel, I thought. I'll try everything. Show one first. Well, even silver will be okay. Any of these, really. And then this button here does the same as this one. So that's the map channel in this new Autodesk material. I think it's a crazy layout, but that's what they decided. In the original physical material, it's this button here. So it's the one next to the colour. Okay, and then I'm going to choose the bitmap map. Okay, and then I can simply choose the same image as I just chose. There it is. Okay, so notice how here we can type in a size. I'll show you just to prove that it works. So I'll assign that material. I'm going to turn this button on to see the material. So there you can see the image is on the surface, but it's the wrong size. But now, if I change it, let's make it again 500 wide, 1500 high. Straight away it changes. Okay, so again, it's that, you know, departments of people who don't really know how to use the program deciding things, and that Autodesk material was a really stupid decision they made. And again, it's what you get in Revit. So when you bring a material in from Revit, it's using that Autodesk material. It's a real nightmare. But again, if you just switch them over to physical materials, or even just switch the channel, the map channel to a bitmap rather than an Autodesk bitmap, it works perfectly. And then you get the control you need. So here you can see it's got my texture on the geometry. We can see it. We've got a good handle on the size. But now I'm going to show you another way. If you turn real world scale off, then you can set the size using tiles. Okay, and so that way, I'm actually just going to turn the map back on there so you can see it. If I set 1 and 1 for my tiles, there's one copy of the image on each surface. Right, and that's a great option for things like this, because then if I set this to, say, 3 and, how many was it the other way? Oh, so it's 4 and then 4. Perfect. Okay, so I'll set it to 4 tiles in each direction. Yeah, it would. So you'd have to have a different texture for that, but you can do that.
Can you repeat?
Yeah, you can, absolutely, yeah. So we can make it follow. Now, there's another trick which I'll show you later, but yeah, no, we can't use shrink wrap. Yeah, I'll show you with the proper mapping later. But even just like that, with box, with the default direction, you can just change the angle here. So that's to rotate. You can see they're using the Z, the W axis. You can rotate the direction. And yeah, that's all hopefully good background. But what I'm going to show you now, if I go and just start again, I'll make a new box. And then on the modify panel, notice it's got Uvw Map Size Terminal. So this time, before I convert it, I'm going to turn that off. Leave Generate Mapping Coordinates on. Right click, convert to, add to a poly. Go and change some things, just like I did before. And I'll start using shortcuts for those things in a minute, but for now that'll do. Okay, so then I'll put the texture on to this new one, and it should, by rights, follow the original box. Now it's getting a bit confused even there. I've done this before and it's worked perfectly. And yeah, maybe if you're doing something like this, you need to look at unwrapping as well. Oh, that's because I've got the angle, so it's me. There we are. That's it. Okay. So again, let's go back to 4. 4. And so then it's just the start point that I might bring up. It's still, for some reason, deforming a bit. Maybe it's just getting confused, but I can easily there at least bring the V value up. Well, it depends on how you're trying to apply the textures. Yeah, definitely good to think about. Yeah, if you're tiling, absolutely. Yeah, always turned off. Yeah. Okay, and you can go much further than that, and you can control it by each face, and apply the textures exactly onto each surface, exactly where you want them to go. And that can be a really important thing for detailed models, especially for furnishings, but also sculptural types of things like this. And I can see like a lot of setup, but once you get that set up, then you can easily copy those objects and then just do variations on it. Okay, so you can go forever like that, and once you get some good setup, then it's so easy to, of course, just do simple modifications to get variations on the original. Let's do one more. So how are we going for time? Okay, so I'll just do one last thing. So that's materials, and again, I'll keep coming back to materials. I know it's gotten very, very technical with materials. Unfortunately, a lot of these 3D programs are like that. They just give you too many options, and again, too many different material types that aren't that good. So the Autodesk materials can be a bit of a problem. Fortunately, even though there's some good basic setups there for starting points. But then moving forward, if you then want to try and do a simple render of that, it's not as bad. They've actually done a pretty good job automating a lot of the lighting with the materials. Well, I think the issue is that anyone who does it professionally is going to use V-Ray, and V-Ray has its own materials that Still can be a bit technical, but they work a bit more consistently than all the different million Autodesk options you've got. So you all know about V-Ray, hopefully, or have an idea about it, would have heard of it. Yep. So we should have it here by the end of the year. I'm really pushing hard for it, but it's difficult getting, through IT to have them approve it. But once they do, just because it's not a standard program and it costs a bit of money, but also it's just not standard. But once we've got V-Ray, then the materials hopefully will make a bit more sense as well. You can make them work with the Autodesk ones. And then, again, moving forward with the lighting here, we've got a couple of options. You can just go and make a light and use the sun positioner. But if you go onto the Systems tab at the end, you have this thing called a daylight system. So I'm just going to click there, and then it's going to tell me that I should set the exposure to a physical camera. So I'll say yes, I want to do that. And then I'm going to click and drag to make my compass. Release. And then it'll say you're creating an MR sky. Do you want to use a MR physical sky? Yes, again to that. So I'll just then move the cursor to set the height of the sun. So now, by rights, I should be able to render. Again, Autodesk are just killing everyone with their crazy decisions about rendering, because you'll see this light is an MR light. MR means mental ray. So it's not always going to be compatible with the new engine, ART, that they decided in their wisdom to switch to. But let's try it. Yep, working. It's okay. But just watch out for that. You'll see sometimes you get lighting issues because of anything to do with mental ray. It's not really Autodesk's fault, that was NVIDIA. Being the lovely big corporate people they are, bought one of the best rendering programs ever made, called Mental Ray, and then decided to discontinue it and not make it available to anyone anymore. Yep. Crazy. Like Apple. Apple have done that before as well. It's just mad. It's because they probably realised they could put the technology into their graphics cards and make more money out of it that way or something. But it's been a real disaster for anyone who does this sort of work. So all I'm doing there in the modify panel is increasing the scale in the render multipliers for this plane, so that when I render, the plane goes further to the horizon. Okay, does that make sense? So we can see that the plane isn't that big, but by increasing the multiplier for the rendering, so the render multiplier, then it will go, again, virtually to the horizon. Okay, so then maybe, well, I will just show you, having said that the Autodesk materials are terrible, and they usually are, sometimes you just need something quick. You can use those. So in concrete, just try them. So if we try one of the concretes there, assign it, and with the default options, it actually will work without you needing to do a whole lot. But then customizing it can be very, very difficult. So when that happens, again, if you want to change it, maybe think about using a physical material as well instead, and use these presets as a starting point. You do definitely get a bit more direct control. Yes, try polish concrete. So now I can click on this M button, which is the same one I did before to go to the map. I have to go to this channel here to see the concrete texture. This one you can see is on tiling. So I'm going to tick use real world map scale. Click this button here, view image, to see the texture. That might be familiar to you if you've made a concrete material in Revit. Same texture Revit's got. And so how big do you think that would be in real life? About 1 metre across, maybe 2 metres across, and 1 metre high, let's say. It could be. So 2 metres across, 2,000, and maybe I'll make it 1.5 metres. The other one. So remember, to see that texture in the viewport, you click this button here, and then we should be able to see it on the plane. Sometimes it's easier in a top view, and high quality. Why can't we see it? It should come up. Yeah, maybe I'll render to see it, but if we click on this, you can see it's definitely working on the material. Real-world map scale's on, it's on in the plane, so you want those two things together. If you're going to use real-world map scale on the object, it's got to be on in the material too. So the opposite with tiling. And render again, and it's still not going on. Did I assign it? I didn't assign it, that's why. That's why I didn't see it. Okay. So remember, drag the sphere or the material onto your surface. That's an easy way to assign. And let's that's a bit better. Okay, so then again, coming back to the size, I can oversize it. That's an old trick. Make the textures much bigger than they would be in real life, just to get the look you want. Okay, so there we are, and then maybe as a finishing touch, we could brighten the whole thing up by going to exposure control. I'll click render preview, and then to increase the brightness, we can reduce the exposure value. And then render. Okay, so anyway, hopefully I'll give you some options. Probably went a bit further than I wanted to with materials, but you've got to see that. It's again just that awful technical thing Autodesk have done with their Autodesk materials, which is nuts. They did a terrible branding thing there because they made all these materials. So the others that you can see there, all these things called Autodesk materials are the new ones, but they made physical materials and all the other old ones that work. And the ones that are called Autodesk materials are some of the worst. Even though apparently that was meant to simplify it for everyone and make it easier and more accessible. Trust me, in reality it does the opposite. So, anyway, hopefully that can give you some ideas, and but just remember at this point you don't need to really put materials and lighting on, maybe just plan for that, but otherwise think about modelling approaches and just coming back to where we started, primitives are often going to be a good starting point. And did any of you get to make things with shapes using the line tool or any of those other shape tools? Yeah, so that can be a good starting point as well. Some things work better that way, but probably most of the time you'll start with a primitive. So just make sure you have a good look at that, and then know how to develop it using either an editable poly or modifiers like that FFD. And FFD modifiers can go onto anything. They don't need to be primitives. So this is an editable poly. I can still apply an FFD modifier to it. Does that kind of make sense? Yep. All right, so I'll finish there.